So much for joining me for this first episode back of the But First She Failed podcast. Wow, I've missed you guys so much. It's been a whole year since I put out a new episode. You may have noticed the intro is new and updated. There's just so much to catch up on, and I'm excited to get into all the things. First off, I was on maternity leave for over a year. Yes, my daughter just turned 1 year old. She's thriving. She's doing great. Before I went on maternity leave, you may have remembered, you may recall that there were so many things going on in my personal life, and I was really reluctant to pause on the podcast just because I love it so much. I love this community so much. I love all the things, right? But I really felt like God told me to pause for a season, and I'm so glad I did because I had no idea what was coming. And I'll share more about that in the podcast episode. But I also want to say that I learned so much while I was away. I grew in a bunch of ways, which I'm excited to share. I also failed, and I realized I did a lot of self-reflection during this season of pausing, and I reflected on a lot of things, and I realized that I failed not only myself, but I feel like this podcast in a lot of ways last season as well as this season, I failed in some ways, and I want to share that with you. And I want to share what you guys can expect moving forward. And my real hope is that as I share my story, my journey with you guys, that you guys are going to be able to glean some stuff, some tips, some insight from my journey that you can apply to your lives as well and to your journey. So hopefully you won't fall into the same things, or maybe you're dealing with some of the same stuff I'm talking about, and you can get out of that funk, right? So I am so excited. But before I dive into it, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that listened while the podcast was on pause. We haven't put out a new episode since October of 2023, yet we were still trending on different Apple podcast charts. Like, we were still on the charts for most weeks, actually, in different countries around the world, I was like, how is this even happening? But I was just so grateful for you all. And we even got some reviews while I was away, and those came through, and those were super encouraging. And I just want to thank you so much for your support. And now let's get into it. I'm so excited to dive into all the things, right? Let's get into what's juicy, right? Why I paused on this podcast, right? I learned so much while I was away on maternity leave / sabbatical / full stay-at-home mom season, whatever you want to call it. I learned a ton, and I'm excited to share it with you all. Now let's get back into what was happening a year ago when I paused, right? I was 9 months pregnant with my second child. I had a 3-year-old son that was adjusting to a big move that we had made from the inner city. We lived in downtown Miami, and we moved about 40 minutes north of downtown Miami to suburban life, like quintessential suburban life. And that was a big, you wouldn't think that at 3 years old it affected him, but it actually did. It was a huge move for him, for all of us. He was adjusting to, big city life versus suburban life, a new school, because we put him in a new school, a new home, about to be a big brother. There were so many things going on. And simultaneously, my son was also diagnosed with sensory processing disorder or sensory processing difficulties. So that was a huge thing for us, where we had to learn, we had to put him in occupational therapy, and it was a new thing we were all learning, right? So those were some big things going on. He needed a lot of emotional support in that season, and I had to pause on a lot of things. As well as I was diagnosed, you may have recalled the last few episodes I mentioned that I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes during that season. We were doing renovations in our house. We moved. There was just so much going on. And, like I said, gestational diabetes is something that maybe some of you guys have had that, right? So you probably know what that is. But for me, it was a brand new thing. I did not know how to eat for diabetes, right? I had to learn a new way to eat, a new diet that was helpful for diabetes, right? Because I didn't want to affect my baby, right? So I read books on it. I learned a lot of things. It was like a whole, I feel like I went to college for gestational diabetes, learning all the things, as well as I had to start pricking myself 3 to 4 times a day, which, if you know me, I have a huge blood phobia. I literally cannot see a cut. I freak out. I am no good with any of that stuff. And I had to learn how to prick myself 3 to 4 times a day to measure my blood sugar levels. So it was just a lot on me mentally. For me, that was super, some people, that's super easy. That's not a big deal. For me, it was really, really mentally challenging. Dealing with those phobias. There were so many things going on. Like I mentioned, I really, really wanted to, get ahead and do all the things and leave episodes ready for you guys all set. But I really there was just so much going on. And simultaneously, I also felt like the Lord told me pause on this podcast, right? And faith is a big part of my life. And I just really felt like God was like, just put it on my heart, like, you need to pause this thing. And even though I love this podcast, like I mentioned, and it was really hard for me. I used to work in news. I used to work in national news. I used to work for Univision and Telemundo, among other networks. And so I take this stuff really seriously. Like, I take it like it's my career and it's my full-time job, meaning when I worked in news at Univision, I used to work for a news magazine show, kind of like 2020, but in Spanish. And we would go live on Thursdays, right? And if I was a producer for an 8-minute episode, an 8-minute story within that, show, or 7 minutes, whatever the slot was for that story, I had to do everything that I had to do in order to get that story out, because what was going to happen, we were live, and it would be like live, like imagine nothing being on live air. I'm sure the executive producers could have figured something out, but it was like a huge deal. It's like you had to meet those deadlines, right? And the same dedication that I put at, my career when I worked in national news, I take that same dedication and I put it towards this podcast, right? I think it's really important, and I, as much as possible, even, you probably remember from previous episodes if you've been listening for a while, even if I have to be up until 2 a.m. the night before, I try to put out an episode every single Wednesday by 7 a.m. That's my personal little goal that I try to do. And so I knew that if the podcast was going, I was going to have that level of commitment and dedication to it. And, I just take it so seriously, right? And I am actually so glad that I paused on the podcast when I felt like God told me to, which was actually the last episode, I think was like October 23rd or 25th, I think. And my daughter was born on October 31st. So like just a few days before she was actually born, and she was born early, a couple weeks early, because I got preeclampsia, right? It was really scary. I went to an appointment. Like I said, I paused on the podcast. I still thought I had like 2 weeks left before my daughter came, and I went to an appointment, and they were like, your blood pressure's super high. They monitored me. They sent me to the hospital. The next day they were like, we need to deliver you early. Like, I had already had a C-section with my son, and they wanted me to have a C-section again. Basically, they were like, you're a ticking time bomb for preeclampsia. We need to deliver now. And I ended up delivering about a week early, my daughter. And it was a really scary moment, because I didn't realize when I was in the hospital after the C-section, recovering with my baby, there was so much stuff going on. I didn't realize that I was on 6 different pills to keep my blood. So preeclampsia, what it is, let me take a step back, is basically blood pressure, right? So I was dealing with a blood sugar level, which was diabetes, and now I had a blood pressure situation, which if you are watching and you've had preeclampsia, you already know what it is. It's essentially your blood pressure going up and up, and it's like uncontrolled because of the situation, because of the pregnancy, right? And so it's pretty scary when a mom has that, and a lot of things, it can be kind of traumatic. There's a lot of things that's dangerous for the baby, dangerous for the mom. And so praise God, I had the baby. I had Sophia. She was born well. She didn't have to go to the NICU, thank God, because I know that's a difficult journey in itself. So she didn't have to go to that. However, the day that I was discharged from the hospital, that night, with breastfeeding and taking care of my daughter and my son and all the things, I somehow forgot to take one of my pills. And I don't think I knew how serious it was, but essentially I had to be rushed back to the hospital because my blood pressure was going through the roof, and they had to call a code on me, and they had to basically get my blood pressure under control, right? And for the next 3 days, I was in the hospital after I had been discharged. So my baby was home, and I was back in the hospital for 3 days in order for them to feel safe and okay that it was safe and okay for me to go home, right? And the calling of the code was really scary. Let me tell you, I was by myself because my mom had a flu, my husband had the flu, my baby, my son, I think this was at midnight, the night that I had come home. So it was just a really scary moment for me, especially because I'm not great with any of this stuff. As I mentioned, I have a blood phobia. So all things medical, I was just it scares me, right? And so anyways, I am so glad that I paused on the podcast, and I didn't realize how much I needed to focus on my health in that season, how much I needed to focus on my family. I had actually a few weeks later after that, I ended up getting a blood clot in my uterus. I know this is a lot of information, but it was just a really scary moment for me. And it was kind of traumatic, actually. I really started having these irrational fears that I felt like I was going to pass away, and, I wasn't going to be around to raise my kids. And just maybe some of you have dealt with that. I've actually had some friends friends over the last year that have shared similar like that with me as well, that they've kind of gone through that, so maybe it's more common than we know, but it was a really, really scary moment for me. And I'm sharing all of this because I'm just so glad that I listened, that I gave myself space to not only focus on my health, but my family. And, it's been a journey, right? And, I took a while to recover with my health. Like I mentioned, there was just so much stuff going on. A newborn, adjusting to 2 kids. It's not normal. Like that's not easy. Some of you have more kids and it's not easy, with any new baby that you introduce to the family. Also the snap back culture, right? I think that it's so often that we're told like you need to snap back into shape, you need to snap back into your corporate role. Like you get emails 2 weeks out of having a baby or C-section, which takes a toll on your body. A lot of times when we have our businesses, we need to snap back because we have emails, we have things, like all the things, and it's like we really need that space to rest and recover. And like childbirth is not an easy thing, right? And I just kind of felt like, man, I went this different route of not working my corporate job that I left in 2020, not going the corporate route, and to take as much maternity leave as I want. Like I have that luxury in this moment. I have that blessing or that privilege, that I'm able to do that. And so that was one of the reasons where I was like, I am going to take a little bit longer than I originally thought. I was going to pause for 3 months, but I was like, actually at 3 months, I was like, I still need some more time. And I tried to give myself as much grace as possible because I had these competing thoughts of like, you have to be a boss babe. Like you have to, like, what type of boss babe takes time off to, to be with her babies and to be like, to be a stay-at-home mom and all the things, which was actually one of my biggest things that I'm going to share about how I grew, right? I grew in a lot of subtle ways, and maybe I would say mostly subtle ways that other people probably can't tell, right? You probably don't know it. Even if you're my friend, you probably don't know how I grew because these are more internal things and like private victories. While I was on my sabbatical or my maternity leave, my stay-at-home mom season of the year, I read a lot of books that were on my to-do list for a long time. One of them was 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Leader, right? And I'm going to get into it in future podcasts. Let me know if you love that book. If you want to know more about it, let me know, because I'm definitely want to do a rehash and share a lot of takeaways from that book. But one of the things it talks about is private victories precede public victories, right? And in my life, I feel that I needed to have a lot of those private victories before I can have the public victories that I would love to have one day, right? And one of the private victories that I needed to have was maturing not only as a wife, but maturing as a mother as well, right? And, there's a lot of things that I needed to grow up in. I needed to get stronger in. And I really feel like this year was the year of that, right? Like I grew as a mother to my son. I feel like I was very intentional, really there for him. I was able to help in a lot of different ways that I needed to mature in, right? And with my daughter as well, and my husband. And there was just so much, again, maturing that needed to happen right there. And, one of the biggest takeaways of this season was really, like I mentioned a little bit a few minutes ago, but the whole thought of like, you need to be a boss babe, right? Like you only have value. Like I didn't realize that I had this like thought pattern or this belief that as a woman, I went to school, I had my career, like I love this stuff. Obviously, this podcast is about career, entrepreneurship, personal development and growth, all those things. So obviously I love this stuff. It's my jam, right? But I didn't realize that I was giving so much more weight to not only myself, but other women when they were thriving in their careers and businesses. And I didn't realize that motherhood is literally the most important work that we'll ever do in our lives. And that's something that I believe now, right? In my life, right? Whatever people want to do, if they don't want to have kids, that's totally cool. But in my life, I really felt like, wow, I was dismissing it as not an important thing. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this is a very important thing. And I saw that on Instagram one time. I saw a post that's like, this is the most important work we're doing right now, right? Of raising our kids. And I don't know. I know it sounds very cliche. I know it sounds very like something like duh. Like every woman should know this, right? Intrinsically, every mother should know this at least, right? Because I love my kids to death. I love my kids, but I don't know that I knew that, right? I thought that I had to, have my career, my business, all the things going in order to have value, right? And so this year was really a year of learning how to be a better mother. Realizing that's the most important work that I'm doing. It's actually more important than this podcast. It's actually more important than a lot of things that I'm doing, right? And being okay with that, right? And it was healing. Like to say it to put it in, I don't know how else to put it except that it was healing for me. It was a healing season in a lot of ways. It was a season of my priorities being reset in a beautiful way, right? Like, I'm a daughter of God. I'm a wife. I'm a mother, and I am a podcaster. I'm a journalist. There's so many different hats that I wear, but I really needed that reset to be healthy, right? I feel like I was operating from a not healthy way, right? I grew also my journey with health, right? Gestational diabetes taught me a whole new thing about health and wellness and how to eat and all the things and working out. And I'm on that journey. I'm still like not perfect, but I've definitely like changed a lot of things of how we eat in our household. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that kind of stuff on the podcast, and I'll share more about that, but in coming episodes. But it's definitely a way that I grew, putting my health first, because it's like, I definitely want to be here. I don't want to go through a scary moment. If I can avoid a scary moment, I am going to avoid it with my health, right? So I'm making a lot of changes that I didn't realize I need. I grew up in a lot of ways, and I needed to grow up that I hadn't grown up in, right? And, there's a lot of stuff coming up in this upcoming season and these upcoming episodes about that stuff. So I'm excited to get into that. But now I'm going to share how I failed in that last season and how I even failed in this season, right? Here comes the tea is what I wrote, right? Like, this is the tea that you probably tuned in for, how I failed, right? If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know my big story of failure. If you don't, go back to episode number 1. I share all the details. I bare my soul in episode number 1. It's a little cringe. I actually have never been able to go back to listen to it because it was so like hard for me to share that. But essentially, episode number 1 is my story of failure, my big story of failure, which was when I was let go from a position that I loved in the industry, in the TV industry. It was like a dream role, a dream company, and I was fired from a position. And for me, it was like I lost my identity. It was just like earth shattering for me, right? And I started believing these lies that I wasn't good enough to be in the room. That's why I was fired, all the things. And I couldn't even say the word that I was fired, right? Because I thought that was a reflection of who I was, right? I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I failed. I felt like a failure, right? Like failure was my identity, right? And it's something that I learned in that season. I started this podcast. I healed from it. I'm on this journey to redefine failure for all of us, right? My journey is really hoping to redefine failure for you so that you can go out and do the boss woman things that you need to do, because the reality is like, every successful person you need moments of failure, right? Like, it goes hand in hand, right? And if you're too scared to fail, you're probably too scared to do something about it, right? And so, and I'm going to get into that, right? Because that's kind of what happened in this season. But if we go back to last season, I want to apologize to you guys, right? Because the reason, when I did a lot of self-reflection, I realized that in that last season of the podcast, before I paused, I know I had a lot of stuff going on in my life, and I'm not saying like, oh my God, I'm not being hard or beating myself up. I'm just recognizing and owning up to stuff so I can grow, right? Because that's a huge part of growing, owning up to things. And one of the ways that I feel like I failed in that last season was acting like I felt like I had to act like I had it all together, right? When I started this podcast, my whole goal was, hey, we're in this together. We're on this journey. We're growing, we're developing, we're facing our fears. We're doing the things that we're called to do. We're going after our dreams, right? That's what this podcast was about. But it's somewhere along the line, I started feeling like I had to pretend that I had it all together when I didn't, or I had to act like my business was booming when it wasn't, and all the things, when I'm still honestly trying to figure it out with the business aspect of this podcast, right? And that was something that I felt like I started getting into it started paralyzing me in a lot of ways, right? Because I started acting, I don't think I was super authentic. Like, I think I was still me, but there were moments when I felt like I just couldn't share stuff when I probably should have shared stuff, because it probably would have been helpful, right? And authenticity is what this whole podcast is built on. So, not doing that, I was becoming scared to fail again, right? And which is ironically very funny, because that's what this whole podcast is built on, right? Like, overcoming that fear of failure, right? But I was secretly dealing with the fear of failure, right? I was scared to try new things. Like, for example, video. Like, today's episode, if you're listening via the podcast, today's episode is actually also being recorded on video. And moving forward, I'm going to do video. It's something that I've been scared of doing for a while, but I'm moving into that, right? And I was scared to try new things because I felt like I had to have it it together, right? And the reality is when you start something, it's not going to be great the first time you do. This is my first video episode, so it might not be great. I may change up the way that I do the setup next time. Things can change, right? But I just got so scared with social media. Is another example. I got really into this rut of posting the same thing, the same content, the same templates, and like not being adventurous because I was scared of failing. I was scared of it like sinking, not doing well, all the things. And I became non-innovative, which is not what I want to be, right? And so again, I want to, say sorry because I became scared to try new things because I thought I would be foolish and it wouldn't work. And that led me to being stagnant and not being real and adding the value that I set out to add. And maybe, that. And then, with this podcast this season, did I want to start this podcast sooner? Yes, I did want to start this podcast sooner. It's been a whole year since I paused, actually a year and a couple of weeks. So we're in November, the last of 2024 when I'm recording this, and the podcast last aired in October of 2023. But I got into analysis paralysis. I got really stagnant. I got really scared of getting back out there, recording an episode because it had to be perfect. What's the value? What am I going to share? All the things. And I just realized I got into this huge funk, this huge hole that I was getting into. And I don't know if you deal with this. And if you do deal with this, I want to encourage you that sometimes you just got to take that step. It's not going to be perfect, but you just got to take that step because you're going to feel so much better on the other side. In my case, because I bare my soul in this podcast, I'm going to be honest, I felt that I was starting to become bitter. And I've said this in previous episodes, but when you are not walking in your purpose, when you're not walking the thing you're called to do, the thing that you love to do, the thing that I feel like a lot of us, we know what we're called to do. We know what brings us so much joy, right? A lot of purpose, right? And when we're not walking that thing and we're not being real to who we are, a lot of times we start feeling frustrated. We start becoming like these mini haters. We start getting feeling insecure around other people that are walking in their purpose, and we see that, right? We start having condemning thoughts, right? Condemning thoughts of like, why aren't you doing this? You should be doing better, all the things. I was getting so frustrated and I was just kind of like spinning in circles and analysis paralysis, not managing my time well. I actually do better when I have more on my plate than when I have less on my plate. So excited about adding more to my plate in this season and as we launch this podcast again. But yeah, I got, stuck in the fear of doing video, fear of new setups, all these things paralyzed me, right? So I want to say that I'm sorry for how I failed you in the last season. I'm sorry of how I failed you in this season. I'm also giving myself kudos because you have to face what you're failing in order to grow, right? So I'm believing that this is growth right here. And that's what this podcast is about. I learned so deeply that fear of failure is not something that you get over one time. That's what I learned in this last season. It's something that you have to continually be getting over, right? You need to continually be facing your fears. You need to continually be growing. If you're not growing, you're, what's that saying? If you're not growing, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, right? And so you constantly have to be pushing yourself to get out of your comfort zone. You constantly have to be growing, because if you're not, you're going to start feeling frustrated. You're going to start feeling not like the best version of yourself, right? And the goal of this podcast is to help you become the best version of yourself. That's really my heart's desire. I really want you to be the woman that you feel like you're created to be, the best version of yourself, right? And so I hope you'll forgive me. I hope you'll stay along for the journey. A lot of things are, in store for this season. There's a lot of fun stuff. So I'm really excited for everything that's coming. So here's what you can expect moving forward, right? You can expect authenticity and realness from me. You can expect me to do the very thing I'm preaching to you guys. I'm going to be doing it myself. I'm scared as I'm recording this podcast episode, but I'm moving forward with it, right? And so I'm encouraging you to do the same if you're in a moment doing something like this, right? The only way you can get past fear is if you don't let it stop you, right? But despite my fear, I'm doing this, and I hope it encourages you. Like I said, what you can expect, these are things that you can expect in this upcoming season, right? You can expect to hear from more women of color. This is more minority women. This is something that I really had on my heart to do from when I started the podcast. And I think I lost my way somewhere along the way. Of course, all women are welcome on this podcast, but that is something that I want to be a little bit more intentional about, like highlighting stories of women, minority women that are, building these empires, doing really cool stuff, and hearing their stories, right? And so that's that's my original intention, and I'm going to be a little bit more attuned with that in this moving forward, right? You can expect growth. I am committed to growing, and I hope that you'll come on this personal development and personal growth journey with me. I realized while I was away that, man, my thing is really personal growth and development. Don't get me wrong, I still love the business stuff, I still love the career development. So this place is really where personal development and your personal growth meets your career dreams and your business dreams or your entrepreneurial goals, right? So that's what this space is, and I'm really excited to kind of lean into more of that personal growth stuff because I love it. I'm committed to growing, and I hope you are too, right? You can expect to hear more about my faith, a little bit more about me. You can expect to hear me being more bold about my faith, rather, right? I'm Christian, and it's a big part of who I am, and it informs a lot of my beliefs and a lot of different things. And so you will hear a little bit more of my faith coming out in different episodes, in different moments, and I hope you're okay with that. My goal and my heart's desire is not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but rather to make you feel loved and encouraged, and that's always my goal, right? So as I share my faith, my goal is really to encourage you, so I'm going to be more bold about it, something that I'm challenging myself in my personal life, and something that's going to come out in this is the new season of me and being authentic, right? And what will be the same, right? You're probably asking like, okay, what's going to be the same? Well, you can still expect to hear from women entrepreneurs and career trailblazers that are doing innovative, fresh things. And, I hope that we can glean and get information and tips and all the things and be encouraged and inspired by them. You can still expect that. Remember that all these crazy successful women that we are so encouraged by, they all had these moments of, personal failures and moments where they felt set back or discouraged, right? Another thing that I want to add is discouragement was a big issue for me in this last season, and maybe you deal with discouragement as well, right? So my goal with this podcast is to encourage you. Every time you tune in, I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be inspired. And so that's kind of where we're at, right? We're going to continue to hear really interesting stories. I'm going to have great guests that are going to add value to your life. I'm excited to share my personal growth tips with you, what I'm going through, what helps me. And I'm just excited to dive into this. So thanks so much for joining this first episode of But First She Failed. I hope you will join me next time. I hope you got some information. And I hope that if you're in a moment similar to what I've gone through in this last year or where I'm at, I hope that you leave this encouraged that you're not the only one. You can do great things. You can start today. You can start tomorrow if you want, and it's not too late for you. So thanks so much for joining us for this episode, and I hope to see you next time.